Welcome to another episode of Pacific Matters. We've got a packed show for you today. First, we'll sit down with Dave Guerrero. He's the new Economic Development Manager for the CEDA on Saipan. Here's our interview. Now we're joined with Dave Guerrero, who is historic in many ways, the first Economic Development Manager of the Commonwealth Economic Development Authority. Uh, Dave, thanks for joining us. How are you feeling with your new appointment?
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling excited. I definitely, um, uh, you know, I, I, I definitely want to take on this challenge. It's going to be great for the CNMI, and I'm excited. Also, the mandate is pretty large, so it's a lot of learning and laying the groundwork at this point in time with the position. So.
And can you tell us more about yourself? I know in the announcement of your appointment, we know that you're joining CEDA from the First Hawaiian Bank in Saipan. You served as the Assistant Vice President, Commercial Banking Officer. What is your background and your history and ties to the Marianas?
So I actually grew up here in the CNMI. Went to grade school and then um, did a little stint in the high school and then went out to high school in the States and came back, worked, and then went back to the States to finish my schooling. So I have a master's degree in economics, and as you said, I worked for First Hawaiian Bank. But prior to that, I had I guess jobs with Kaiser Permanente out in Oakland, California, right next to Lake Merritt, and then also with Wells Fargo out in their corporate office in San Francisco. In those capacities, I was doing really anti-money laundering stuff, regulations, um, with Franklin Templeton right after Wells Fargo. I did investments. I was sort of like a supervisor over uh, rep uh, licensed reps throughout the country under the institutional platform. So I come from the investment space, regulatory compliance space, and then now with Wells Fargo, I'm sort of like on the front line looking at all those, handling commercial loans, also individuals, owners, high net worth, those types of things, and also some operations too as well. So I think I have a sort of a wide experience when it comes to that financial space in that regard.
I wanted to ask you more about your specific role and your appointment, but first wanted to touch on CEDA itself for our audience who might be learning of it for the first time. A bit of history because it did go some revamping. The Commonwealth Economic Development Authority, it was CDA at first in 1984, and then in June 2021, it was restructured to CEDA. It's tasked with generating investments, it says, and driving economic diversity for the Marianas. So can you just place CEDA in context in terms of government and the economy in the CNMI? How is this different, let's say, from finance or labor? What is CEDA's role and why is it important to have it separate from everything else in government?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's different ways to look at it and interpret it. But my interpretation of what CETA is, I think, is really to be proactive in the investment space, trying to create like sustainable economic diversification, if you will. I mean, I know we have tourism. And that's always going to be front and center for the economy. But as far as acting as a role, CEDA, acts as an advisor for all these other agencies that want to do loans. We also have a loan department here, and we do microloans, direct loans, and stuff under SSB, DCI, something like that. And that's in partnership with the banks. So I liken it to GIDA in Guam, although GIDA seems to be the mandate. I was looking at their org structure, and I think they have you know a lot more personnel than we do. But I think this is a step forward as far as really trying to fine tune and narrow down what the CNMI needs. Um, you know, uh, there are things that we want within the law, but I feel like we need to really diversify, especially with the pandemic and how that worked out as far as the supply chain and food security, those kinds of things. I think we are gifted in a way with our environment through fisheries and through agriculture. So really, I want to help, the farmers, the fisheries, and also look to bigger investments as well into the IT space.
Welcome back to Pacific Matters. We continue our interview with CEDA's Dave Guerrero after his new appointment. We talk about the new structure of CEDA in the CNMI and some of the challenges he's facing on the road ahead. And what is the org structure going to be for CEDA in the CNMI? Are you aware?
Well, we have our executive director, Manny Saban. So he is my direct report. And then after that, there's 3 different departments under him, which I will be spearheading I'm the first hire for the economic development division. So still got a long ways to go. Need to figure out funding and team and that kind of thing. But right now it's just, I'm day 4 in the job. So just really kind of, because CEDA, when you talk about the economy, is sort of a cross section of all different agencies and what they're doing, right? So we have interest in infrastructure, what's going on there. We have interest in labor market. How are we going to be supportive for businesses that want to come out here and put up shop? Where are they going to get the laborers, skilled workers, those kinds of things? I think the focus really is I think the challenge is going to be really to narrow down and figure out what we want in the CNMI. So there's a lot of stakeholders involved. I'll be, reaching out to a lot of people and trying to figure out ways to collaborate and make sure that we can move the CNMI forward in a sustainable economic way.
And speaking of those stakeholders, I'm sure you're going to be in conversation with the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors, the Saipan Chamber of Commerce, Department of Labor agencies. The list goes on in terms of who's at stake here, and who has
yes, certainly
with the MVA as well. I do want to ask you about some of the priorities we've heard from the administration and maybe your thoughts on it. We recently sat down with the Chamber of Commerce, and when we talk about diversifying the economy, there emerging markets. Some people believe, for example, like the cannabis industry adds a different dynamic in the market, although nothing as sizable as the tourism market. And then recently, Jerry Tan with the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors was talking about the critical need to bring back specifically the Japanese market. So, I was just putting that in context for the question, but what do you see as some of the main priorities, and maybe do you agree with some of the approaches in terms of where cannabis might bring us, where the Japan market might bring us, and also just the harsh reality that tourism is by far second to no one, and is the largest market that we have for our economy, and given the pandemic and its blow to our economy, how do you see things changing or reviving? Do you think it's going to be a matter of going back to old business, or are you thinking of other plans?
Well, for the first part of your question, cannabis, I think the industry there is still, it's still budding, if you will. I think we won't know the true impact to revenues until we have tourism coming and see what the consumption is for legalized marijuana. When it comes to the Japan market, I think, I'm all for it. We definitely want to bring that market back. I remember growing up, we had, a lot of Japanese walking around the streets, and even my grandmother and my parents spoke Japanese. So we have a great connection with Japan, and I look to sort of start that dialogue again with real bona fide investors that are, you know, have the community best interests at heart. I'm willing to work with them all the way. And then I forget the third part. You were
Yeah,
uh,
what is your vision or framework going into this new role when it comes to tourism? Is it a matter of you know uh, reviving what was, or is there a different approach to take given
well,
COVID?
I mean, I think there's wisdom to what was, but you really have to move with the times and the trends. Um, but tourism will always be there. I mean, that's our number one thing is our islands, our environment, our people. So that's always going to be something that will be on display here in the CNMI. So I think tourism will be always kind of, you know, I would say, when you talk about one leg in the pool, it's going to be like a whole body, half of the body in the pool. We also need to diversify too, right? So it's sort of like taking care of what we got, doing what we need to do, um, but also keeping our eye forward and trying to hop on the wave of emerging markets or trends, if you will, in the IT space, in agriculture space, these things.
Before we move on to the rest of the show, we wrap up our interview with Dave Guerrero, who shares his advice to small local business owners and how CEDA can help them move forward. I know we've been talking big picture. I did want to give you an opportunity to address maybe some small local business owners or individual entrepreneurs who maybe started their business during the pandemic, maybe received some of the federal funds that are now no longer available. Uh, if I'm a small business owner or a local entrepreneur watching this and wondering how Dave Guerrero is going to help me, what would you say?
Well, by all means, come over to, we have a loan department. It just depends on what you want and trying to do. I mean, we're not just going to give out money for anything. We need to know what your plans are and how we kind of, we want to help you succeed. We don't want to just give money and then, walk away and think like, 2 years down the line, it's not going to work. We want to make sure that we're good stewards of the money. And so to help those out there, I'm all for it. I mean, even um, because the requirements are sometimes onerous, especially for a new uh, businessman that really doesn't have an idea of like the requirements needed for a loan. Uh, 2 years tax returns, business license, structure, all this stuff has to kind of fall into place in order for it to be sort of a prudent lending situation. Um, but I'm not opposed to even offering grants in a way. It's definitely something I want to explore, and that's definitely my goal is to help out the small business. I mean, that's the engine that really drives everything. From small becomes medium to large, and so help. I want to help everybody across the spectrum, especially the small. So.
And I did want to ask you specifically. I know you said we're recording this interview. It is April 21st, and you're day 4 on the job. But what plans are there, if any, in terms of policy and working with the government or legislature? There's been several proposals just recently. One to increase the minimum wage. That's just one example. Are there any
Yeah.
specific policy decisions or efforts that you're looking at, or is that something you're still exploring?
I'm definitely still exploring and that aspect. Um, yeah, there's definitely is fertile ground to sort of make things more efficient. But the devil is in the details usually. So like I need to go in and I need to go in the trenches and talk to the actual people that are on the ground and see what's working, what's not working, and then sort of work my way up to try and correct or navigate into a better, metaphorically into better waters, safer waters, right? So, yeah, there's always going to be policy change because the trends change, right? The market changes, so you need to adapt to it. So there will always be something that can be done better.
Yeah, and Governor Torres in the press release talked about one of your priorities being attracting the right investors. We've seen the U.S. military make huge investments on Tinian and alter their plans in terms of the use of Tinian in the Northern Islands. I guess what's your take um, on the involvement of U.S. military and more possibility there with our armed forces?
Yeah, definitely. I do see their engagement with the CNMI as very fruitful. Of course, they've had land on Tinian for a long time. They haven't done anything with it just until now. They start talking about this divert field, which I'm all for it. Anything that can sort of increase the activity, the economic activity, and as far as dollars can stay in the islands, I think uh, we have to support that as CEDA and just for the good of our economy, right? Um, Guam was, they were fortunate during the pandemic. They had the heavy military presence now. I guess fortunate or unfortunate, just because, uh, depending on how you look at it, but they did infuse a lot of, or there was a lot of funding coming from that space as opposed to the business side, which was, hampered by tourism again and lack of funds coming through.
Dave, thank you so much. I know you're less than a week into the job, and we've covered a lot of topics. Thanks for your comments on those. I just wanted to give you a chance as we wrap up here for any parting words or anything else you'd like to share that maybe I didn't ask about.
I just, I want to let everybody know that it's not a one-man show. It's not, it's gonna take everybody to sort of hold hands and make sure that we bring the CNMI to a more successful place. So, I'm going to need everybody's help, from the office of the governor to all the different agencies to the legislature. But I'm excited. I'm up for the challenge, and I just want to say to the CNMI that I'll do my best.
All right. Thank you so much, Dave Guerrero.
All right.
In our next story, we get introduced to Guam's Truman Scholar from Northwestern University.
I'm feeling pretty good. I'm so grateful for this opportunity.
A Guam daughter and alum of Guam Adventist Academy beaming with pride after being selected as one of 58 Truman Scholars from across the nation. The Northwestern undergraduate student is studying political science and Asian American studies.
It is a public service and leadership scholarship. It provides $30,000 to go towards graduate education. I'm expecting to use it to go to law school.
She wants to focus on criminal justice and prison reform, challenging harsh policies and the impact of mass incarceration.
I was really interested in going into very specifically this type of public interest type of law where I would be able to help the most neglected, those who can't afford to get all these legal services.
According to the Harry S. Truman Scholarship announcement, she's currently an intern at the Center of Wrongful Convictions and serves as co-president of the Undergraduate Prison Education Partnership.
Oftentimes, people who are wrongfully convicted, their only crime was being born poor and just not being born with all these resources and money. And I think I just want to be a voice for them and fight for them because no one will.
And she thanked those who fought for her and plans to return to give back.
Guam is my home, and I am so grateful to, all the support that I've gotten from my family and my community back home.
Tomas Maglonia for KOM News. And in our last story, we head over to Saipan at the CEDA legislature, where the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors painted a clearer picture of what the Saipan economy looks like moving ahead. Here's more. A clearer picture coming out of the pandemic.
Between 2020 and 2021, there was a 24% loss in food service employers. And so this and a 38% loss in 34% loss in personal care and services.
While there's hope for the tourism industry to bounce back, the grim reality of the remnants of the ongoing pandemic settles in. Even if tourists come, where will they go? That was one question at the center of the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors presentation at the NMI legislature Tuesday.
How quickly they can come back from closure into operation is a concern in our ability to fully maximize our recovery.
The council is 2 years into its 10-year proposal, which ranges from facelifts to recommended legislation. They've been bringing their business slides around the island, making their pitch to local stakeholders. And they're also pointing out the problem.
And so we're also looking at the idea of legitimizing our tour operators in the Commonwealth. We're looking at the idea of accreditation or some form or fashion of professional licensing, but that we also saw, and mind you, I'll put my disclaimer out there. Yes, we operate a tour company in the Commonwealth called Century Tours, I'm sorry. But we're looking at this from a greater perspective.
They say they've seen rogue operators who leave the island with debt and left the bag hanging. Ultimately, Sablan says the honest businesses pay the consequences. Another consequence comes from Airbnbs and guest houses in the NMI.
What we did see is a degradation of our tax base by virtue of Airbnbs and guest houses not necessarily paying their fair share.
He's hopeful that new legislation can level the playing field for the estimated 1,200 Airbnbs and guest houses they know of in the Commonwealth.
And that's the kind of problem child, if you will. They were the people that were, yes, complementing the overall marketplace. We needed the numbers in order to generate the total headcount that came within the Commonwealth in recent years.
Officials continue to keep their eyes on those numbers as federal funding nears its expiration date. Tomas Manglotnya for KOM News. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Pacific Matters. I'm Tomas Manglotnya, looking forward to seeing you right here next week.